Hello everybody, I welcome you to Group 1 Mains special coaching on Paper 4 Indian Economy and Development. Today's topic to continue with is Public Finance Part 2. Under this Public Finance Part 2, we cover the following aspects today. One is the monetary policy, the second one is the fiscal policy, third is union budget, and the fourth one is budget analysis. Monetary policy refers to the steps taken by the country's central bank in order to control the money supply for economic stability. So, for the purpose of attaining stability in the economic system, so that there is not going to be any kind of disturbance in the economic system, monetary policy is used as an instrument by the central bank. It is a corrective measure which is implemented as a policy reform to control adverse economic situations like unemployment, recession, inflation, which are considered as unfavorable macroeconomic aggregates, which need to be controlled for the purpose of establishment of economic stability and running the economy in a smooth manner. Monetary policy also indicates the credit control measures which are adopted by the central bank of a country for achieving general economic policy. General economic policy here refers to that policy which is going to attain the fulfillment of stability with growth in the economic system. Any kind of disturbances, either in the form of unemployment, recession, inflation, together called as disturbances in economic aggregates, are going to be corrected by the central bank by utilizing this monetary policy. Objectives of the monetary policy include attainment of the full employment, so that every person who is willing to work and is having the ability to work is provided with employment opportunities at the prevailing wage rate. Price stability, the citizens living in the country are going to enjoy stable prices. Neither there is going to be fast, positive, upward, steep increase in the prices, nor there is going to be the opposite case. Economic growth is the third important objective. Apart from economic development, economic growth also has to be attained by the developing economies. Economic growth here refers to the real per capita income of a country increasing over a long period of time. Here, I can mention the difference between economic development and economic growth. Economic growth is the problem of, it is the concern of the developed countries, where these developed countries already have completed economic development process and they are in the process of not only attaining highest growth rate in the world, but also in the process of continuing the same economic growth in the future also. But developing economies still they remain backward. Their main aim is to first fulfill the target of attaining economic development and later on even attain higher economic growth also. Economic development is a broader concept which not only aims at increasing the per capita income of the country, the national income of the country, but also wants or aims at structural change or transformation of the country. And this structural transformation refers to transformation of a country from a primitive agricultural country to a very well developed, highly accessible services sector or modern technologically oriented type of economy. Next is equilibrium in the balance of payments. Balance of payments refers to the international position of a country. It indicates the total receipts of a country flowing into the country and the total payments which go out of the country. So, attainment of equilibrium in the balance of payments is another objective for which the monetary policy is framed and implemented in any country as such. Exchange rate stability. Exchange rate here refers to the price of home currency expressed in terms of any foreign currency. For example, $1 is equal to 73 to 75 rupees. These days, one of the important concept under economic discussion is the continuously increasing cost of purchasing $1. So, the rate of home currency, that is rupees, expressed in terms of the foreign currency, that is dollars, is called as exchange rate. Stability has to be attained even in exchange rate, because if the exchange rate is unstable, the international reputation of the country will be badly affected. And when the international economic reputation is badly affected, naturally we fall backward to the list of the countries which are economically forward in the world as a part of global competition. Coming to the next one, equal income distribution, another important objective where especially in the developing countries, as there are lots of inequalities in the distribution of the income, attainment of equal distribution happens to be another objective of monetary policy. Coming to the tools of the monetary policy, these objectives of the monetary policy are aimed to be attained by the central bank of the country, that is the Reserve Bank of India. In case of India, are the first one is open market operations. Open market operations refers to the open market where Reserve Bank of India is going to come forward and sell the bonds and securities directly to the general public. Then we have the bank rate, also called as the repo rate. Bank rate refers to the rate of lending to central banks. Central banks, that is rate of lending to, I regret having specified here central. It is not central, but it is commercial banks. So bank rate is the rate at which Reserve Bank of India gives loans to the commercial banks of the country. The present bank rate or repo rate happens to be 4.40%. The same case, reverse repo rate is the rate of borrowing by the central bank from the commercial banks, that is 3.35%. You can see that the rate of lending to the commercial banks is 4.40%, but the rate of borrowing from the commercial banks happens to be somewhat less, it is 3.35%. The cash reserve ratio is 4.5%, where the Reserve Bank of India makes it mandatory on the part of the commercial banks to maintain a part of its deposits in the form of compulsory cash reserve ratio, which is 4.5%. Statutory liquidity ratio 18% refers to that case where all the commercial banks have to maintain a part of their time deposits and demand deposits in the form of gold, cash, unencumbered government securities, and that ratio happens to be 18% of the time liabilities and the demand liabilities. Then we have the next one, these are the four important tools of the monetary policy through which the monetary policy aims to attain the objectives, that is open market operations, bank rate or repo rate, reverse repo rate or rate of borrowing from the commercial banks, cash reserve ratio and statutory liquidity ratio. The types of monetary policy, we have four different types of monetary policy. The first one is expansionary monetary policy, which is usually framed and implemented by the Reserve Bank of India or the central bank during the times of deflation. Deflation is a situation of lower effective demand or continuous or persistent downfall in the prices, where the mood of the producers as well as the consumers is totally on the negative side, where the production of the goods and services is low because the demand is low. So to correct this deflationary situation, the central bank aims at expanding the monetary policy. For expansion purpose, central bank lowers the bank rate. It reduces the reserve requirements of the commercial banks. It starts purchasing back the government securities which it had given to the general public during the times of inflation. In this way, the commercial bank's capacity to give loans, that is credit creation, increases, and the purchasing power in the hands of the general public also increases. This is called as expansionary monetary policy. Exactly the same thing happens during the time of the inflation. Inflation is nothing but the consistently rising prices situation, where extra purchasing power from the hands of the general public has to be taken back. For the purpose of taking back the extra purchasing power, contractionary monetary policy is implemented, under which the bank rate or the repo rate is increased, reserve requirements are increased, and the extra money in the hands of the public is taken away by the central bank by selling government securities and bonds at higher rates of interest in the form of mutual exchange of collateral securities with the public and taking away the money from the general public. Then we have the other type of monetary policy, counter-cyclical monetary policy. So during the time of business cycles, both recession and inflation, during that particular time, the monetary policy is framed in such a way that if there is recession, in order to increase the spending amongst the general public, the government, the central bank is going to adopt this counter-cyclical monetary policy. Then we have the rule-based monetary policy. Under this rule-based monetary policy, money supply and related variables are controlled by the predetermined rules, norms and standards specified by the government, and here the discretion of the central government becomes limited or less. This is called as rule-based monetary policy, a monetary policy based on the rules and regulations framed and implemented by the government and are going to be followed by the Reserve Bank of India without any kind of modification. Then we have the discretionary monetary policy, exactly opposite to rule-based monetary policy, where this monetary policy is under the total independence of the central bank, where the central bank enjoys greater autonomy on the issues relating to the control of variables of money supply. Monetary policy plays a very important role in order to control inflation and deflation, availability of supply of money and credit. Interest rate structure is going to be integrated, that is the government sector's interest rate as well as the private sector interest rates are going to be integrated and mutually they are going to be associated with each other rather than mutually exclusive from each other. Effective central banking becomes more and more effective in establishment of proper economic stability in the country by controlling the monetary supply. Long-term loans for industrial development can be encouraged under this monetary policy, and new financial institutions which are going to be diverted towards the achievement of agricultural growth or maybe the industrial growth or maybe the service sector growth or maybe the information technology industry. Such kind of specialized financial institutions can be established through this monetary policy. All these points indicates the significance of monetary policy. And recent trends in India, Reserve Bank of India is Apex Bank, and under this Apex Bank, the monetary policy is monitored and regulated. So recently for 22-23, Reserve Bank of India has announced the monetary policy. The main aim of this recent monetary policy happened to be to support the process of economic growth which is going on at a very high pace of acceleration in India over inflation. And a special aspect of this new monetary policy is introduction of a new tool called as standing deposit facility. The previous old tools were repo rate, reverse repo rate, and bank rate, CRR, statutory liquidity ratio, about which we have already talked about. But this is a new tool which has got added in the recent monetary policy of 22-23, which is called as standing deposit facility and is introduced to pump out excess liquidity from the system, that is from the economic system, without exchanging collaterals like government-backed securities, that is without exchanging of the securities and the bonds by the government with the general public. This is a new tool of taking away the excess liquidity that is causing disturbance in the economic system. Fiscal policy is the next important aspect or content of today's topic. The word fisc means state treasury. Fiscal policy refers to policy concerning the use of state treasury or the government finances to achieve macroeconomic goals. These macroeconomic goals comprises of full employment, economic growth, curbing out inflation, etc., or increasing the aggregate demand, etc. Fiscal policy is based on the Keynesian economics, which propounded the use of government revenue expenditure as a key to sound economic management. So, sound economic management is possible according to the famous economist John Maynard Keynes. He is called as a depression economist because in 1930, when the entire world was suffering from the Great Depression, under which there was a kind of passiveness amongst the producers and the consumers and the investors, Keynes has come forward and he has propounded that government should take up more and more quantities of the public expenditure in the form of transfer payments, in the form of public works, so that more number of unemployed people are going to be provided with employment under these long run projects of the government, whereby the money is going to be pumped into the hands of the public by means of taking up public works and transfer payments. Rather, he has suggested that the government should increase its expenditure towards more and more infrastructural provision of infrastructural facilities of longer gestation period, which alone have the capacity of producing greater employment opportunities to the majority sections of the of the population. Then objectives of the fiscal policy: effective mobilization of the resources is one, reducing the inequalities of income and wealth, attaining price stability and control of inflation, generation of employment, reducing the deficit in the balance of payments, increasing national income, development of infrastructure. If you happen to compare the objectives of the monetary policy with the fiscal policy, we can simply come to the conclusion that both monetary policy and fiscal policy are going to be utilized as tools for correcting any kind of imbalance that may arise in the economic system, especially under macroeconomics, for correcting the macroeconomic factors like maybe unemployment or inflation or equal distribution of income or deficit in the balance of payments or attaining higher economic growth. All these macroeconomic objectives or macroeconomic aggregates are interrelated, and any kind of disturbance caused in the economic system because of the disturbance in the macroeconomic aggregates are going to be corrected by the proper implementation of both the fiscal policy as well as the monetary policy. Then coming to the instruments of fiscal policy, just as there were instruments of monetary policy, we have the instruments of fiscal policy. The first happens to be the budget. Budget can be of three types. Annual balanced budget of classical economists of 1930s, where ultimately at the end of the financial year, the receipts have to be, the expenditures have to be made equivalent to the receipts. The cyclical balanced budget, or it is also called as Swedish budget, which is going to be utilized by the countries during the times of cyclical fluctuations in the economic system. When there is a boom in the economic system where inflation is made possible, at that time the surplus budget is going to be preferred, and the surplus attained in the budget is now going to be utilized for the purpose of clearing of the debts. And the opposite case, during the time of the depression, if a deficit budget is going to be taken up, where expenditures are going to be more and even public borrowings are going to be more. So for the correction of the boom situation, that is a positive trend, which is also not good if the economic system is going to continuously run towards the boom situation, because after the boom definitely we are going to confront with the situation of the depression. So during the time of boom, that is a cyclical situation part 1, we will go for a surplus budget kind of fiscal policy. During the time of deflation or depression, we'll go for the deficit kind of budget. Then we have the compensatory, fully managed compensatory budget, where the government is going to come forward and do the adjustments in taxes, in expenditure borrowings, for the purpose of maintaining full employment with price stability. To attain this ultimate objective of employment opportunities to be provided with stable prices, government manipulates or comes forward and does deliberate adjustments in all these fiscal policy instruments. Then we have the taxation, most powerful instrument influencing disposable income, consumption, investment. We have anti-depression tax policy, during which the rate of taxation is going to be reduced. Anti-inflationary tax policy, where the taxation rates are going to be increased and new taxes are also going to be imposed. Then we have the public expenditure, third important instrument. Government expenditure multiplier plays a very important role during the time of depression, and during the recession time, when the confidence of the general public and the producers is very low, at that time the government comes forward in the form of increasing public expenditure. Every 1 rupee spent by the government will have a multiplier effect, increasing the incomes and output multiple number of times. That is called as government expenditure multiplier. And public works and transfer payments are another important aspect. Transfer payments here refers to deliberate or voluntary transfer of money from the government to the needy sections of the society, like unemployment doles or social security measures, or assistance to the secondary gender in the society, that is the women, where especially in case of India, where there is lots of inequalities in the status, as economic status as well as economic status of the women in most of the families, because women are downtrodden section of the society. For the purpose of providing them economic assistance, sometimes these social security measures are going to be framed and implemented by the government, which are called as transfer payments. That is, transfer payments refers to voluntary transfer of money from the government to the needy sections of the society who are not in a position to earn their own incomes. Then we have the public debt, the fifth instrument of fiscal policy. borrowing from non-public, non-bank public, borrowing from banking system, drawing from the government treasury, and this is a new concept, printing of new currency, which is called as deficit financing. So, fiscal policy in India, prepared and implemented by the Ministry of Finance. It aims at raising considerable quantity of money to fund various government programs by means of taxation. It aims to eliminate inequalities in income and wealth distribution by giving incentives even to private sector. We have a neutral fiscal, types of fiscal policy, neutral fiscal policy, expansionary fiscal policy, contractionary policy. It uses government spending, taxation and transfer payments as tools to influence aggregate demand. Then coming to the third part of today's topic, public finance part 2, union budget is an estimation of revenue and expenditure of the central government over a specified period of time, generally an year. It is classified, that is, the union budget is classified into revenue budget and capital budget. A revenue budget simply comprises of revenue receipts and the revenue expenditure. A revenue budget comprises of the day-to-day activities related receipts and expenditures, could be general administration, maintenance of staff in the offices, such kind of things comes under the revenue budget. If you take up the capital budget, comprises of both capital receipts and the capital expenditure. Capital expenditure refers to the expenditures made by the government which have for increasing the capacity of the assets to produce more and more in the future. So, such type of creation of the assets comes under the capital expenditure, and the budget has two parts, that is revenue budget and the capital budget. Then we come to the types of fiscal policy. So, discretionary policy, fiscal policy, non-discretionary fiscal policy. Discretionary policy is implemented strictly by the government for the purpose of curing recession, for controlling inflation, for increasing government expenditure, for raising taxes to control inflation, for reducing of the taxes, for disposing of budget surplus. Then non-discretionary fiscal policy, where the government may not be making stringent rules and regulations for the implementation of this kind of fiscal policy. So, the transfer payments, it depends upon the willingness of the government to do how much to allocate what part of the budget is going to be covered under the transfer payments. Likewise, personal income taxes, corporate income taxes, corporate dividend policy, all these come under non-discretionary fiscal policy. Then we have the deficit financing. So, the concept of deficit plays a very important role under public finance, and it means bridging the gap caused by excess of government expenditure over its receipts through creation of new currency. So, right from 1947 onwards, government has been continuously spending for the purpose of creating so many facilities to the general public. Later on, it has started interfering even in the economic activities. So, for the purpose of infrastructural development, for the overall development of the country, for the purpose of attaining smooth running of the economic system, different economic activities also were financed by the government. So, in the course of time, government expenditures increased over the receipts. So, this type of excess government expenditure over receipts is called as the deficit, and this deficit, for the purpose of reducing the deficit, new currency is going to be created, and this new currency creation for reducing the gap between government expenditure and receipts is called as deficit financing. We have four types of deficits. First is revenue deficit, where revenue expenditure is going to be greater than revenue receipts. Budgetary deficit is the difference between total receipts and total expenditures, because it includes both revenue receipts and capital receipts. Revenue expenditures and capital expenditures, popularly known as deficit financing, and this budgetary deficit adds to the money supply, because budgetary deficit always is tried to be cleared by the government through deficit financing. Fiscal deficit is a very important concept, difference between total revenue and total expenditure of the government, indicating the total government borrowings. Primary deficit, so in order to know what is the status of the government borrowings, we have to understand this particular fiscal deficit, or fiscal deficit is going to tell us about total government borrowings. Primary deficit, if we remove the interest payments from the fiscal deficit, we get primary deficit. And this primary deficit concept is going to clarify us about what is the real situation of the government finances when the interest payments are removed. Then we have, this is a statistical data of fiscal deficit from 2005 to 2014-15, how the fiscal deficit of the center as well as the states continuously increasing because of the rising gap between excess of government expenditure over the government revenue. Then this is the statistical data and achievements of the fiscal policy in India. It mobilization of resources, increased savings, increased capital formation, incentives to investment, reduction in income and wealth inequalities, inter-regional variations reduction were some of the achievements of fiscal policy in India. Fiscal reforms in India, this is an important aspect or the part of public finance part 2, which is repeatedly asked in the Group 1 mains examinations as well as in UPSC examinations also. We have the fiscal reforms in India comprising of the taxation system was made more simplified and improving tax to GDP ratio. That is, more number of indirect taxes are now going to be added, and the tax base also is, the tax rates are going to be increased according to the growth in the tax base. So this is improving tax to GDP ratio, reduction in rates of direct taxes, and reforms in indirect taxes, where the new reform recently added was goods and services taxes. Introduction of the service tax, another important aspect or reform. Reduction in non-planned government expenditure. Planned expenditure refers to that expenditure which government plans during the time of the preparation of the budget. But non-planned government expenditure refers to the suddenly arising expenditure, and government, one of the reforms under the fiscal policy happens to be reducing this non-planned government expenditure, and reduction in subsidies also. Day by day, the government is planning to reduce the consumer subsidies as well as even the producer subsidies, so as to eradicate totally the subsidy concept. Closure of sick public sector companies and giving more importance to the expansion of private sector under liberalization, privatization, globalization. Disinvestment of public sector units, where the profits that are earned through the public sector units are not going to be reinvested for the establishment of the new public sector units or the development of the existing public sector units, is called as disinvestment. Efforts to reduce disinvestment also is another important step towards liberalization or totally liberalizing the Indian economy and opening it globally, so as to attract the foreign direct investment into the establishment of the private sector within the country. Efforts to reduce government administrative expenses also. So the government also in the course of time wants to reduce its revenue expenditures, for the purpose of which it wants to focus more on reduction of administrative expenditures. So efforts were also made as fiscal sector reforms in India. The last aspect of today's public finance part 2 happens to be Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act of 2003. Important milestone which was which has taken place in the public finance of Indian economy, where strict rules and regulations in the form of reform FRBM Act was implemented for the purpose of controlling this fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit, as I have already told you, is going to negatively affect the international reputation of the country. It is going to increase the public debt burden on the head of each and every Indian citizen. So fiscal deficit definitely may become quite dangerous, hampering the growth of the economy and reducing the reputation of the country in the global scenario. So for controlling fiscal deficit and for seeing that every government is going to strictly restrict managing fiscal deficit, the FRBM Act was framed and implemented. The Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act 2003 is an act of the Parliament of India to institutionalize financial discipline. So for the purpose of implementing or improving the financial discipline, not to amongst the institutions as well as especially amongst the state governments and the central government, this FRBM Act was passed. To reduce India's fiscal deficit happens to be its primary objective. It improves macroeconomic management and the overall management of the public funds by moving towards a balanced budget, where there is not going to be any kind of unbalanced budget, and the concept of deficit is going to lose its importance or is not going to be utilized by the governments for meeting their excess expenditures. So, this was the objective behind the FRBM Act. Apart from that, for maintaining transparent fiscal management systems, for a more equitable and manageable distribution of the country's debts over the years, to aim for fiscal stability for India in the long run, FRBM Act was implemented. So, now we'll just go through the previous questions that were asked pertaining to today's topic on monetary policy, fiscal policy and the union budget. The first question is about the public debt. Public debt is essential for the development of the Indian economy. Please justify your answer. Yes, definitely. Public debt is going to be essential because every country has to depend upon the other countries in some way or the other. And in the case of India, because it has huge population on the one hand and is aiming for attaining higher economic growth in the coming few years, making a special a kind of image for itself in the global scenario. Naturally, public debt borrowing becomes very essential, and without borrowing we cannot go for the deficit financing, because deficit financing is nothing but the printing of the new currency. This printing of new currency may increase the money supply, and increasing money supply definitely is going to reduce the economic stability or cause disturbances in the economic stability. So, in order to see that economy is running smoothly, but at the same time attaining higher economic growth, public debt becomes essential. This is the way in which you have to justify your answer while writing the answer in your mains examination. Coming to the second question, critically analyze the causes and consequences of India's public debt relating to the period from 1991 till date. So, what are the causes of increasing public debt in soon after 1991, and what are going to be the consequences, possible consequences in the coming future depending upon the contemporary situations of the Indian economy if the public debt is continuously going to increase, or how we are going to manage or do the servicing of this public debt are some of the important topics or aspects which are supposed to be touched upon by the candidates appearing for the mains. Next is discuss the recommendations of the expert committee constituted to revise and strengthen the monetary policy framework. We have seen that a new tool was added recently for the monetary policy 2022-23 SDC. And apart from that, several recommendations were also made by the expert committee about the cash reserve ratio, about the repo rate, the reverse repo rate, etc., and statutory liquidity ratio. So, the question is asking the candidates to discuss those recommendations made by the expert committee. Write about the important tax reforms in India since 1991. And the previous questions to continue with, explain the objectives of the monetary policy, explain the principles of public expenditure, describe the highlights of fiscal reforms and Budget Management Act of 2003, discuss the concept of revenue deficit and effective revenue deficit, justify the reasons for introducing effective revenue deficit. And here give the details of the expected revenue deficit and the effective revenue deficit by the recent fiscal policy as per the Union Budget 2022-23. Very soon, the Finance Minister of India is going to present the Union Budget, and we are just in the mode of, Telangana budget going to be presented in a day or two. So, naturally, the students appearing for the main examinations are requested from this TSAT channel, especially under public finance. Please be aware about all the important aspects pertaining to the monetary policy, fiscal policy and the deficit, which is going to be specified in the various budget presentations, because your answers have to be supported by the contemporary aspects which are going on in and around India as well as in different states, especially your state. Coming to the next one, distinguish between capital budget and revenue budget, explain the components of these budgets, state the reasons for the introduction of FRBM 2013 Act, and critically discuss its salient features and their effectiveness. So, FRBM Act, why it was introduced? Because fiscal deficit was becoming unmanageable. State the reasons for the introduction of FRBM 2013 Act, critically discuss its salient features and their effectiveness. Last question, again on FRBM 2013 Act. With this, we come to the end of Public Finance Part 2. In this session, the main questions were from public debt, budget, FRBM Act, fiscal deficit, deficit financing. request all the students to concentrate on these 5 aspects of public finance part 2. We come to this end of this particular session. Thank you for the patience shown towards listening to this particular topic. I wish you all the best for the examinations. You were there with me for the last half an hour. Dr. E. PAVANI, subject expert from Government City College from the Department of Economics. Thank you.